Well, I'm so pleased to welcome you to the Audio Garden today here on Listen and Be Heard. And we're here to talk about Infinity Pool, a wonderful collection of poetry on University of Chicago Press. And maybe we could start out by talking about the title Infinity Pool. It brings a lot to mind for me if I just try to visualize that, it's like endlessly deep. Um, Maybe there's no end to the edges of the pool.
Yeah.
Maybe I could throw a rock in there and it would never reach the bottom. The rings might never stop. And it makes me think of stream of consciousness writing as well, which taps into something I like to do, which taps into our sort of endless subconscious. So that's what it brings to mind just off the bat for me. And I wondered why you chose that title.
Yeah, I mean, I love that stream of consciousness metaphor, and I mean, I think it's part of it. I've been working on this collection for a long time, as happens with poetry, and I am a slow composer of poetry.
Hmm.
But it came to me about halfway through writing it, and I just, when it comes to thinking about us and computation and how we fit into this world, so much of computation and like now AI really has this infinite feel to it. It has this really expansive feel, and I think about infinity a lot, like as a concept, as a theory, as sort of how we relate to the infinity of like the actual universe that we live in, or the and
And what
yeah.
about the pool?
And the pool, I mean, part of that was just, I think I was watching a TV show and I saw an infinity pool on it, and it just evoked this like desire. I think, I mean, infinity pools do have this feeling of wealth and calmness that so much of this world sells to us. And
Oh, so you're actually, which I didn't even
yeah,
visualize, but
yeah.
when you're thinking of one of those pools where you're endlessly swimming
Yes,
in
yeah,
the
like one of
same
those
place.
pools where like they fall
Okay.
off of the horizon.
Well, thank you
And
for giving me another idea.
yeah, and I mean, that's, it started with that literal, and then it immediately went to the more metaphorical idea, and there's a, and the idea of a pool, an infinity pool. I mean, part of it makes me think about gene pools. It makes me think
Hmm.
about how we're in many ways all related to each other, all related to all the species in this world. This idea of how connected we are. If we start really zooming as far back as we possibly can, about how we think about the future, and
Hmm.
and how we are sort of swimming through space together. And I mean, and then very coincidentally, because this was not why I picked it. But because I teach computation and I teach interface design, I actually found that the original designer of the iPhone literally said that they were trying to make the feeling of an infinity pool with the surface of the screen of the iPhone.
Uh-huh.
And and that as a metaphor for like the space of the internet, I think is a very powerful metaphor, because this space that we go through, that we sort of like wade into at all times when we're getting information, it is this indeterminate sort of infinitely deep space that the whole metaphors of going down rabbit holes and getting lost. And
Uh-huh.
so even that kind of, I mean, and I'll just say it, that metaphysical space that we go through, to find information and to connect with each other and to speak and to be on Zoom and video conference and so forth, we are sort of wading through metaphorically this pool. And
Like
so yes.
maybe a digital, but well, I guess you wouldn't really call it a digital pool exactly, but I'm going to go into your notes that you end and start the book with, if you don't mind,
Of
because
course. Yeah.
you talked about that you teach computation, and I just wanted to read these notes quickly. The titles for Perceptron, Deep Mind, and Deep Dream are drawn from the history of AI neural networks. The perceptron, which was originally proposed by Frank Rosenblatt in 1962, and DeepMind, an AI research lab, was first established in 2010 before Google acquired it. Deep Dream, a computer vision program, was first released by Google in 2015. And I'm going to keep going for a moment here with how you start the book, which was a quote from Stanislaw Lem. Phantomatics stands for creating bidirectional links between the artificial reality and its recipient. In other words, phantomatics is a feedback art. Phantomatics stands for creating situations in which there are no exits from the worlds of created fiction into the real world. So maybe you could explain why you wanted to start your poetry book with that and how your work relates to your poetry.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm a big fan of Stanislaus Lem. His book, his probably most popular book, Solaris, which has been made into many movies, is one of my favorite works of science fiction. And as I was reading, I teach many aspects of computation, and I mean, just to go all the way back to that, I've as a young poet, when I was first writing, I worked professionally as like a website developer and coder, and I kept the two practices very separate. I was sort of like, this is my day job, and
Was
poetry
that
is
80s, 90s?
90s and 2000s, yeah, like late
Okay.
90s,
Uh-huh.
2000s. Mainly 2000s is when I was, getting my MFA in poetry and also, doing my web development work. And it was when my first book came out, I started teaching poetry. And that was right around right at the turn of the decade, around 2010, 2011. And that was when we finally started becoming really saturated with the internet and social media. And I noticed in my students' work just a different relationship between the self and the world, than what I was used to. And my students that I taught were fantastic writers, but it really was quite different, and it really made me curious about
In what
how
way?
um there was, I think, a less solid sense of the self. There was less a sort of like grounded idea of this is me and I relate. It was more nebulous and amorphous. And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's hard to specify specifically enough, because everyone's different. And when you're reading their poetry, and especially when you're workshopping poetry, you do get to know everyone on a very deep and intimate level. But this idea of how they relate, of who they are, it seemed much more slippery and open, and sort of less grounded than I think the sort of pre-internet generation. And it just made me very curious about how, all this work that I've been doing on the side, all of this coding and designing and data, architecture, how that's really shaping people.
Mm.
So I went and got another
The medium
degree.
is the message. Come
Yeah,
back to that a lot, right?
I do too, and I
Uh-huh.
mean, it really, to bring it down to that, I do really feel that, and poetry as a medium, I feel like it's so open.
Mm-hmm.
We can do so much different, so many different things with it. So, poets are so different. How they shape themselves and how they shape their forms is so radically different and wonderful. And with computation, it's very, it's very rigid. It's very structured. And I became very curious in how to engage that. And so I got a degree at Parsons in data visualization, and just to sort of be more deeply trained in what I've been doing. And I immediately started teaching computation and bringing my literary background into it. So anyway, so I started reading uh, a lot of theory, and then also a lot of speculative work, like Stanislaus Lem's work, and I was shocked by especially his futurist texts. I think that quote is from Summa Technologica or Technologia. And and he really predicted so much of this
Mm.
world way before it was happening, and so much of the world of computation that we're living in, so much of that goes back to the 40s and 50s and 60s. You know, people have been imagining and speculating and trying to code and trying to come up with AI for a very long time. And so even though this feels so new, the ideas behind it are really have been embedded, especially in mainstream American culture and in computational
They're
culture for a
they're
very long
growing
time.
up, maybe.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Well, you brought the poetry and the science together in a very well, beautiful and artistic way in this book. I want to keep them separate for a moment, um, and go off in both directions because I'm interested in your process. But I also wanted to ask you, on the other side of this, I have about 2,000 probably writer Facebook friends who are, or maybe more, who are up in arms right now because their work's been used, stolen, they claim, and perhaps that's true, by these AI, fed to these AI giants. I think it was Meta, or, and it's all now you can just go find, there's a tool you can go find out if your book was used. Was your book used? Do you know?
it wasn't.
It
Yes.
wasn't?
No, I looked,
Okay, it's probably too radical. But the question is, for those writers, they obviously feel like they've been robbed. So that's one perception of AI. And as a writer, I'm interested in what your perception is on that end. But then there's so many other ways to look at artificial intelligence. I mean, perhaps another negative one is just the energy it uses.
yes,
So,
absolutely.
from a climate argument point of view, it's also a very difficult thing for us to reckon with. But then there's the fact that intelligence, I mean, there isn't actually any artificial intelligence, there's just intelligence. So I think you're in a unique spot to kind of speak about that from different points of view. Being a poet and a digital artist, and also really having this knowledge of the birth of the concepts of intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, one, I agree with those writers. Their work was stolen. There's no getting around it, and it's the ways that these large language models have been built. It's very much part and parcel of how larger computation companies have worked. The whole ethos of move fast and break things. It's very damaging. I think it's very damaging to culture. And I think that I think that writers have every right to be compensated financially for the work that has been used to train these machines, to find patterns.
And do you foresee maybe, books being written more by um, computational intelligence than by real people at some point in the future?
I mean, I'm sure there will be some, and I know there was a short story that was recently released that some people thought was decently written, and some people thought was poor writing. I personally, especially from a poetry perspective, I personally, and I think we as poets do not need to be worried about the creative aspects of AI. I mean, the poetry. I taught a class on AI in the fall, and and we did a lot of experiments with generated work, and we also got into the concepts and the programmatic systems that that these are based on. And basically what these machines are is pattern generators. years. And what interests me specifically as a poet and as someone who works in computation is that in computational space, in these machines, they're just working with pattern, and meaning is all up to us. And meaning, the meaning that is produced by these machines all came out of the works that were co-opted or stolen in order to train them. And then, the secondary meaning is when they produce work that looks like it makes sense, we're projecting meaning onto that. These machines, these actual machines, they're not intelligent. They're just reproducing patterns that we human beings use. And I think, in poetry, this tension between pattern and meaning has always been very much, my interest is really how, when I decide on a form, when I decide on the shape of a line, the shape of a poem, how is that going to change the way I speak, the way I think, the way I express? And we as poets can continue to invent and produce meaning and expand how we express ourselves and how ourselves relate to others. And while as these chatbots and machines get more deeply ingrained into our culture, I'm sure people will start developing relationships with them, and we will start to feel that there's meaning related to it. But in fact, really, it's language. It's that language has this power. And these, AI, the large language models, the chatbots, I mean, one, they're running partially on, yes, all of this actual electrical power that is damaging the environment, and partially on just the power of language, the power of like what we as human beings have evolved together collectively to produce. The way that they co-opted that language, I find to be extremely troubling. But I think that we're at least at this point, and for
It's
the
really
near,
just kind of a stab in the dark of like infinity again, right?
yeah,
I mean,
yes,
and they're choosing. I mean, it's discriminatory too. They want to present a certain type of I don't know, maybe final word. Like these are the things, and this is what we fed to our intelligence, and so now this is what it has to use.
yeah,
And maybe that's skewed, but it's going to be skewed, right? No matter who's doing it, it's going to
yes.
be skewed by their perceptions of, what's worth feeding, what is intelligent, even.
Yeah, and even the way that these machines, the kind of language that they produce, they're producing a type of language that is very professional. It's really towards sort of economic ways of thinking about language. And there are poets. There are some wonderful poets who work with computation and work with AI and work with AI models to produce work, and that work is actually quite fascinating. And usually it's most fascinating when it's revealing the logic that's happening inside the computers. There is very experimental work and very linguistically fascinating work that can be generated using computation with smaller models that are not, burning like many flights, many intercontinental flights every time they run, that really do generate language in quite interesting ways. But again, that's all based on the humans who are in charge of it. That's all based on the humans who are saying, okay, I'm interested in language. I'm interested in like how a machine and how the
You
logic's
you
involved.
could like theoretically feed your own language. I mean,
Yes.
but your own poetry to be manipulated with your own sort of ideas about how to manipulate it and sort of have an endless infinity pool of your own work, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, and that would be more fun than this sort of mass,
Uh-huh.
downloading of everyone's work, and so it can produce sentences that seem like a human's writing them. Yeah.
Right. And sometimes, and I contemplate on top of all of that, I, let me not go off on too much of a tangent here, but that, these conglomerations who choose what to publish they kind of look for that algorithm, that formula to have a guaranteed success. And so these things that they're choosing to feed is like they're still looking for this perfect formula, which kind of gets homogenized down after a while into something that's really not that interesting anymore at all, right? I mean, or it has that potential to go in that
Well,
direction.
absolutely, and actually, algorithms, especially within AI, they're literally about homogenizing. Like they're literally based on statistical methods that find averages and homogenize everything. So there's a real limit to that.
Uh-huh.
And I think there are ways in my classes and with my more experimental artistic students, like I very much encourage really trying to, produce noise, produce randomness, produce, interesting outcomes that are surprising and really make us think about what is this thing that we're working with. So I think that,
Which is
again,
leading us now more towards process. But what I would like to do before we
yeah,
get there is actually give our listeners an opportunity to hear some of your poetry, if you don't mind
of
sharing some of
course,
it.
I'd be delighted to.
That would be great. And please just choose your favorite if you had something ready.
Um,
I did love Persephone. Is that the whole title? I don't think so.
yes. Oh, well, if you love that, then I'll read that because
Okay.
because
Although I have to say, I love the title also, Super Fragile Catalyst. I like saying that.
yes,
But you don't have to read that whole poem.
yeah, that is one of my favorite titles.
Okay.
And it's interesting because both of those poems, in at least some way, especially Superfragile Catalyst, is about my daughter.
Uh-huh.
Persephone maybe a little bit less. I wouldn't compare my daughter to Persephone, but it's about daughters. So I'll read Persephone.
Thank you.
Okay. Persephone. Daughter time cuts the rhyme. A mouthful asphodel, harsh marble polish. Slickers on and orange eyelets trick the pixels into flies. See-through thoughts catch stipple bruising on the moth's edge. Ruby calyx tubing, diamond skin drillfish. Rivers sip on shallow glasses, surfacing to ankle height. Lowering the chin to the heart, the forehead enters summer. Incursions down the hillsides, glaucous flowers, phosphorus, opening your hair to the aerosol air, fairy clocks, and the rest is luck. Sepal of the lithosphere, beaded by the aether, where the ghosts of men appear, skin as thin as paper. Is the record in the letter blood or knots of wood burnt on her clothes? Girls slip through the flow of morning traffic. A soldier feeds pomegranate seeds and water to kiss. Horizon, razor, and wire, the camera's eye captures fissures in the code, sunlight through a punctured sleeve. No snow on her sparrow brown shoulders. Braided radioisotopes, breath-like whips of almost frozen lake weeds, whistling blue corneal film. The earth splits like eyelids, purple pools of pupil oil, unspeaking leafless foil.
Yes. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Rhythm, rhyme. I feel the body in this. It's interesting that you were talking about your students sort of being disconnected from that feeling, because I feel the rhythm and the music even in your poetry. And I wondered how you feel about that, if you feel like that's also coming from a very like human kind of thing, which is somehow, an experience that is both together and separate from intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, I'm most interested in poetry, and I mean poetry in a large sense as music. I'm very, that's what we respond to first with poetry is the music of it, and before the meaning, before any of it, and and I think that the musicality of poetry, especially because it's based on speech, it's based on words, I think it's when it's working, when we feel it, when we hear people read, it really is a way for, bodies to enter each other, for like this disembodied self to really surface and appear in front of someone else. I think of like, there's a John Keats, I think it's a John Keats fragment called "This Severed Hand" or something, or this hand. It's not severed hand, but you literally feel a hand coming out to grasp you,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that the music of the language in poetry is what makes that sensation come through. And yeah, and so I mean, when I'm writing poetry of any kind, and I know, in this book, it's very intentionally, there's some very lyrical work, there's some very narrative work, and there's some very transparently understandable poems, and there's some that are so lyrically out there that's the attempt to actually make meaning out of the sense is very, very challenging.
And I'm interested though where those come from, because we were talking about stream of consciousness, and that's the feeling that I got from some of these poems. Like they're images that are coming almost like rapid fire, and you are just allowing them to. And like I almost felt like I could keep going with some of them and just come up with some more to add to the feeling of it. And that's a wonderful feeling. But so I wondered, is that part of your process? And you're telling me that you ask your students to kind of let go. And so if you could maybe talk a little more about that.
My process when I'm writing, and again, I really, the poems start with a feeling, and they start with the music, and they start with a line appears, and that opens up a space for me. And that's all I need. And that's all I'm looking for. I never have an agenda when I write a poem, and I don't have an investment, or I've never really had an investment having a consistent voice. I know that there's a voice of mine that remains throughout all of this. But with those more stream of consciousness or just stream poems, I let the music sort of open up that space, and then whatever I start seeing, whatever images come up, I just allow them to appear and follow them. And I mean, interestingly, I don't know if there's any poems in this book that just flowed right out immediately. It's rare. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
poems take me weeks, days, months, years to write. And it's just, after a while, the poem takes on its own intrinsic logic, whether
Mm-hmm.
that's I'm telling a story, or that's this is a series of sounds and images that have a logic that I wouldn't be able to explain. But I'm just going to follow that to where it's taking me.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in the ones where they're less narrative, I'm really listening to what the music is telling me,
Uh-huh.
as if I'm
And I
not.
get that
Yeah,
feeling. It's
yeah,
almost like you're conjuring some archetypal images out of dreams. That's sort of a feeling that I got from it as well. I don't know, what the critics would say about that,
yeah. I
but
mean, I do. I mean, I do just want everything, again, to use the pool metaphor, to just surface, and there's a
right.
lot in there with us that we don't know about. And I think I wrote at one point about, when I write, it's when I'm most myself and most not myself, and I'm sort of most interested in what's in there that I'm not aware of. And,
Mm-hmm.
and if I let whatever is there come to the surface, then I have to trust it, and I have to just follow it and see where those images are going to take me. And with a poem like Persephone, I don't, I think I was just really, I was brought to this physical place, and I wanted to inhabit it. And and that's pretty much what I could say as an explanation of it.
Okay.
Is that the music surfaced, and then I said, "Where are you taking me?" And that's where I arrived. Yeah.
Well, there you have it. There's another way to write poetry. I wonder if you would share another poem of your choice with us.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll pick one that's not too long. I have a lot of long narrative ones. Maybe let's see. I think I'll read one of my early sort of AI inspired lyrics. So let's try out. Okay, I'll do this one. It's called Thinking Machine. And yeah, generally this is about me, not about a machine, or maybe it's about a machine. Anyway, Thinking Machine. Overlord, motherboard, pinball wizard, vector swarm, self-assembling coherence engine, lithe electric watercourse, dark arcade, meat maze, color-shifting anal, mood ring lizard, rabbit-worn bee cathedral, termite palace, time bomb, skull bulb, planted fist-deep in wet earth, fed letters, fetters, wish deep in jest, kiss me at the neck. A fleck of red lights up in the gray meter, lyric slip a glitter, slide a slice of lemon round a highball's lip, salt crowned, shadow gowned, wrist wrapped in crystal thistle tines, glance up the spine, spike lush currents, tessellate emergent, landscape portrait fortress, porous verse, chorus thirst. I only sing well to the people I love.
Thank you, Jonathan Thirkield, author of Infinity Pool from University of Chicago Press. How would you like people to get in touch with you or respond to your work?
That's a great question. I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way to get in touch with me these days, and it's the only social media that I check these days too.
Oh,
So,
interesting. Can I
yeah.
ask why? LinkedIn?
I will, Twitter has turned into what it's turned into, and I was there briefly. I've spent so much time sort of critiquing social media. It's a place where I haven't really found myself there yet.
Uh-huh.
So
Very interesting.
yeah.
I wonder if you'd mind if we could close with 3 prompts for you to just respond to.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you. So the first one is listen and be heard.
And what does that mean to me?
Whatever that brings to mind, you can just.
I mean, I think it means, to me, it brings to mind, how do we really speak to each other? How can we have conversations where we're really speaking and really seeing each other? And, and I think that is in everything I do, that's my ultimate goal is how do we just speak to each other as humans? Yeah.
Thank you. And what about we the people?
I mean, that's the world, that's America, that's our country. And it's still our country. And, I believe in all of us who really care about the fact that we are together in all of this and this world and the globe itself, Yeah.
Thank you. And I have one more. I appreciate this. Banning books.
Silly.
Okay.
That's my response to that.
Thank you very much. And I thank you so much for your time here in the audio garden. Jonathan Thirkield, author of Infinity Pool.
Thank you so much, Martha. It was wonderful talking to you.
My pleasure.